The city of Chicago does not ease gently into morning. It arrives all at once, cold air off Lake Michigan, the groan of delivery trucks on Michigan Avenue, the hiss of commuter trains pulling into stations still half dark. At 6 in the morning, Blackwood Global's 42nd floor was as silent as a church. The office cleaners had already gone. The security guard downstairs was on his second cup of coffee. The lobby cameras flickered with that slow, indifferent blink they always had at this hour. Nobody was supposed to be up here yet. The elevator opened anyway. She stepped out carrying a leather satchel over one shoulder, a slim tablet tucked under her arm, and a cup of coffee she'd made herself in the break room on the 39th floor because the espresso machine up here was apparently broken. She'd noticed that the night before when she'd come to drop off her HR paperwork. She had already ordered a replacement. It would arrive by 8. Her name was Victoria Hayes, and she had exactly 27 minutes before anyone else showed up. She moved through the executive suite the way a woman moves through a room she has already memorized in her sleep. She knew the layout from the building schematics she had reviewed. She knew the filing system from the IT logs she had accessed during her background clearance. She knew Ethan Blackwood's daily schedule from the assistant she was replacing, poor Janet, who had quit after 18 months, citing irreconcilable differences with the concept of being yelled at before 7 a.m. Victoria did not intend to get yelled at. She sat at her desk, opened the schedule, and got to work. The first problem she found was the 11 o'clock board presentation. The numbers were wrong, not badly. Wrong, not sloppily wrong, but wrong in the specific and dangerous way that suggests someone had reversed 2 line items in a financial projection and hoped nobody would notice. Victoria noticed. She flagged it, corrected it, and moved on. The second problem was the 2:15 meeting with the Singapore delegation. Ethan's previous assistant had accidentally double-booked it with a conference call to the London office. Victoria rescheduled London to 4 o'clock, sent a brief professional note of explanation, and moved on. The third problem was subtler. The quarterly review dinner with the Hargrove family had been scheduled for Thursday evening, the same evening that the Hargrove patriarch Gerald had publicly announced he was attending a benefit gala across town. Either Janet hadn't read the social pages, or she hadn't thought it mattered. Victoria thought everything mattered. She moved the dinner to Tuesday and noted the reason in the calendar file. She had been here 23 minutes. She finished her coffee, straightened the papers on the desk into a precise arrangement, and waited. At 6:52, the elevator opened again. Ethan Blackwood filled a room the way storms fill a sky. He was tall, 6'3" in flat shoes with the kind of build that suggested he had once been athletic and had never entirely stopped. His hair was dark, shot through with early silver at the temples. His eyes were a cold, particular gray that reminded people of deep water and made them nervous without quite understanding why. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and he wore it the way men who grew up with money wear expensive things, like he had simply always owned it. He was also, Victoria noted, immediately running on almost no sleep. She had read the reports. She knew about the insomnia. She could see it in the particular stillness of a man who has stopped fighting exhaustion and simply decided to function through it. The faint shadow beneath his eyes, the slight tension in his jaw that comes from holding yourself upright through sheer will. He looked at her the way he probably looked at everything new that appeared in his office, with the cool measuring assessment of a man who trusts nothing he hasn't personally inspected. "You're early," he said. "Yes," she said. He waited. Most people filled silence with explanations. She did not. He crossed to his desk, set down his briefcase, and picked up the schedule she had laid there, printed, organized and annotated with brief notes in the margins. He read it for a moment. Then he looked up. "You moved the Singapore call. There was a conflict. I resolved it." "Who told you to do that?" "No one," Victoria said. "That's what a secretary is for." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he sat down and opened his briefcase. "Your job is simple," he said without looking up. "Manage the calendar, handle calls. Don't disturb me unless it's urgent." "I don't do simple," Victoria said pleasantly. He looked up. "Excuse me." "I solve problems before they become disasters," she said. "Your 11 o'clock presentation had a transposed line item in the Q3 projection. I corrected it. Your Thursday dinner was double booked against the Hargrove Gala. I moved it. Your Singapore delegation was going to arrive to an empty conference room because your London call was scheduled on top of them. I fixed that too." She paused. "I can do simple if you prefer, but I suspect you don't actually prefer it." Ethan Blackwood stared at her. In 15 years of running Blackwood Global, No assistant had spoken to him like that on their first morning. Most didn't speak to him like that at all. Something shifted in his face. It was small, barely visible, but Victoria was trained to read small things. "You'll be on probation for 90 days, he said. "Standard policy." "Of course." He went back to his papers. She went back to her desk. The day began. In those first hours, Victoria moved through the professional mechanics of the day with the kind of efficiency that comes not from speed but from knowing exactly where things belong and placing them there without fanfare. She organized the incoming correspondence by urgency and type drafting brief summaries for the lower priority items so Ethan could triage them in under 3 minutes rather than 20. She updated the vendor contracts tracking sheet, which had been maintained in a system that made no logical sense, and rebuilt it in an hour into something that could be read by a human being at a glance. She made 3 phone calls to the Singapore delegation's travel coordinator to the hotel that was hosting Thursday's dinner and to the building management office about a leak reported in the stairwell on 41 that had been logged and apparently forgotten. The stairwell had been leaking for 11 days. Nobody had told Ethan. She made a note in the maintenance log and flagged it for the facilities manager with a dry email that said, essentially, this has been logged twice and addressed 0 times, and if the water reaches the server room infrastructure on 41, it will be considerably more expensive than whatever it costs to send a repair crew today. The repair crew arrived at 11:15. She did not mention this to Ethan. Some things she had learned in her previous work are better reported after they are solved than before. People who are told about a problem and then told that it is already handled feel cared for. People who are told about a problem and then have to follow up on it feel burdened. She was not going to be a burden. By noon, the rest of the executive floor had formed an opinion of the new secretary, Marcus Webb. The head of legal had come by at 8:30, looking for a contract file, and left 3 minutes later with it, along with a corrected clause he hadn't realized was legally problematic. He had gone back to his office and told his paralegal, "I don't know who that woman is, but she's either terrifying or brilliant, and I think it might be both." Simone Park, who ran corporate communications, had asked Victoria to draft a press response to a minor shareholder complaint. Victoria had returned it in 11 minutes, fully formatted, legally clear, and about 40% better written than anything Simone had produced in the last quarter. Simone had saved it to her desktop and said nothing, which was for Simone the highest possible form of compliment. The mailroom supervisor had tried to flirt with her. Victoria had smiled, thanked him for the packages, and sent him away without his knowing quite how it had happened. Ethan noticed all of it. He noticed because he noticed everything. It was both his strength and his burden, and because the woman sitting 20 feet from his office door was doing something no assistant had ever done in the 2 years since Marcus had promoted the last one out of the role. She was doing the job ahead of him, not catching up to his pace, actually ahead of it. At 12:15, he walked out to find that she had left a plate of food on the corner of her desk with a small folded note that read, in precise handwriting, "You haven't eaten since before 6. The soup is from the Italian place on Walker. It won't stay warm." He stood there and read the note twice. Nobody tracked whether he ate. He took the soup back to his desk, told himself it was because he was hungry, and did not examine the matter further. At 2:45, the cybersecurity alert went off. It started small, a flag in the network monitoring system that the IT team picked up first. A foreign IP address was cycling through password attempts on the executive server portal. Not a full-scale breach, not yet, but the beginning of one. The IT manager called up to the executive floor, slightly panicked, and Victoria picked up the phone. "Has the access attempt reached the senior clearance layer?" she asked. A pause. "No." "How did you know about clearance layers?" "Has it?" Not yet. It's still." "Terminate the external portal access from the administrator panel, cycle the VPN keys for the C-suite accounts, and isolate the connection from IP range 91.207. It's a Ukrainian proxy server. Call Interpol's cybercrime liaison if the attempts continue. I'll send you the contact information." She paused. "Do it in the next 4 minutes." She hung up and went back to sorting the afternoon correspondence. Ethan was standing in his office doorway. She felt him before she looked up. She had that instinct she had always had, it the kind that comes from years of working in rooms where the wrong kind of attention could mean real danger. "How do you know about cybersecurity protocols?" he said. His voice was calm, but his eyes were not. "I took an online course," she said. "You gave them the IP range. I read about proxy server patterns. It's interesting stuff." She picked up the afternoon correspondence. Your 3 o'clock is confirmed. Conference room B. He watched her for a long moment. Victoria. She looked up. That was not a skill listed on your resume. I'm full of surprises, she said. He turned and went back into his office. But he left the door open just slightly the width of a hand, and she understood that from this moment he was paying a different kind of attention. The office emptied gradually as evening fell. By 7:30 only the overnight security was left and the soft blue glow of screens in the trading wing where the London analysts were still running numbers. Victoria had stayed because there was a document she was waiting on from the legal team, and because though she would not have admitted this to anyone, she had noticed the light still on in Ethan's office and found herself reluctant to leave before it went out. She was working through the next day's schedule when she heard it. Silence, not the usual silence of a working office at night, that textured quiet full of hums and distant keyboards. Complete silence, the kind that happens when someone has stopped moving. She stood cross to his office door and looked in. He was asleep. It had happened the way exhaustion sometimes wins, not in a dramatic collapse, but in a gradual surrender. His pen was still in his hand, tilted against the desk. His head had lowered onto his crossed arms. The silver light of the city came in through the floor-to-ceiling windows and fell across him in long, quiet lines, and in sleep the hardness went out of his face. He looked, Victoria thought, like a man who was very tired and had been so for a very long time. She went to the cabinet in the small alcove off his office. She had noted its location. Her first hour here, and took out the folded blanket she had put there herself that morning, along with the first aid kit and the backup phone charger and the other small provisions of her own careful planning. She shook it out quietly and set it across his shoulders with the specific gentleness of someone who does not want to wake the sleeping. She was almost at the door when his voice came. You don't have to do that. She turned. He was watching her. His eyes were open fully immediately, the way a person's eyes open when they were never fully asleep, but only resting at the edge of it. Someone should, she said. He stared at her. The city glowed behind him. The lake somewhere out there in the dark. 42 floors below cars moved in their slow rivers of light. Most of my staff avoids the office at this hour, he said. I was waiting for the Morrison contract. You could have had it sent to you at home. I don't mind, she said. He watched her with that measuring look, the one she had seen first thing that morning, the one that had not entirely gone away all day. Only now at the end of a long day, with the city quiet outside, it was something more than assessment. It was the look of a man trying to understand something that does not fit any category he already has. Who exactly are you, Victoria Hayes, he said. She smiled. Your secretary, she said. She left the office. But in the elevator going down through the dark building, she pressed her palm flat against the wall and let herself breathe. Because his eyes in that moment had looked at her the way no one was supposed to look at her, and she was not yet sure what to do about that. The week settled into a rhythm. Every morning at 6, Victoria arrived first. Every morning she had already solved at least 2 things that would have become problems by noon. Every morning, Ethan Blackwood walked off the elevator and found a schedule that ran like a Swiss watch, and a desk that contained exactly what he needed positioned where he needed it, as if the day had been constructed specifically around him. He did not say thank you. Men like Ethan Blackwood had been taught through 100 subtle lessons across a lifetime that excellence was simply the expected standard, not a thing to be praised. But Victoria noticed the small shifts, the way he stopped coming in with that braced, slightly defensive quality she had seen in those first days, the posture of a man preparing to manage chaos. He trusted now that things would be handled. He moved differently through the morning. She noticed everything. That was the nature of her training, and also she was beginning to realize the nature of this particular man. He was a person worth noticing. He spoke 4 languages. She discovered this in the 3rd week when the Paris office called, and he took it without transferring, switching from English to French in a single clean breath. He had a memory so precise it bordered on uncomfortable. He could quote exact figures from a report he had skimmed 2 weeks earlier. He read constantly, not just financials and industry journals, but history, philosophy, the occasional novel left spine-cracked on his desk, with a bookmark at the 2/3 mark. He had opinions about things that surprised her, about architecture, about urban planning, about what made certain neighborhoods in Chicago feel alive while others didn't. He was not the man the business press described. The press had a version of Ethan Blackwood that was useful to them, the cold empire builder, the ruthless negotiator, the reclusive billionaire who had turned a small regional investment firm into one of the most powerful private financial groups in North America. All of that was true. None of it was the whole story. The whole story was more complicated and far more interesting. He began in his own way to notice her back, not professionally that had happened on the first morning. This was different. He began to notice her the way a man notices a woman when he has told himself very firmly that he is not going to, and the effort of not noticing has itself become a kind of constant awareness. He noticed when she wore the dark blue blouse that made her eyes look different, warmer, somehow more amber than brown. He noticed that she laughed precisely once every hour or so, always quietly, usually at something she was reading, and that the sound of it was the most genuinely human thing in the entire executive suite. He noticed that she had a habit of tucking a strand of hair behind her ear when she was working through a problem, and that she went still and precise when she was worried about something like a bird deciding whether to fly. He told himself these were observations, general observations, the kind of thing a careful man makes about anyone who spends 12 hours a day in his immediate vicinity. He did not entirely believe himself. He also began to notice what she did not do. She did not flatter him. The assistants before her had all in varying degrees calibrated their behavior to what he seemed to want from them. Some had been aggressively cheerful. Some had been carefully deferential. One had been so afraid of him that she had once printed the wrong version of a contract rather than knock on his door a second time in one morning. Victoria was none of these things. She treated him exactly as she would have treated any person for whom she was responsible, honestly, directly, and without the social fictions that most people apply to the very powerful and the very wealthy. When he was wrong about something, she said so. Not loudly, not with any apparent awareness that this was unusual, but clearly and without apology. The first time had been in his third week over a proposed communication to one of their institutional investors. He had drafted something that was technically accurate, but he now realized upon hearing her read it back somewhat condescending in its assumption of what the investor needed to be told. The tone implies he hasn't read the Q3 report, she had said. He has. He had questions about page 12. How do you know that? He called on Tuesday when you were in London. I took the call. He was very specific. She paused. If you tell someone something they already know, they start to wonder why you're telling them. It makes them suspicious rather than informed. He had looked at her. Rewrite it, he said. She had. It was better. He did not tell her it was better, but from that point on, when he had communications that mattered, he began leaving them on the corner of his desk with a post-it note that said, "Look at this when you have a minute." She always looked. She always had something useful to say. It became quietly a collaboration, the kind that forms between two people who are both very good at what they do and have discovered that the other person is also very good at what they do and that the combined intelligence is worth more than the sum of its parts. He had not had a collaboration like this in years, possibly ever, in this specific way. He found it disturbing was too strong a word, uncomfortably pleasant, like the specific feeling of a room that is warmer than you expected when you walked into it. The man's name was Derek Holt, and he was the director of acquisitions for Blackwood's West Coast division. And he was standing at Victoria's desk at 11:15 on a Tuesday morning, leaning too far over the counter in a way that was less professional and more territorial, and smiling the kind of smile that had probably worked for him many times before. "So I'm in Chicago through Thursday," he was saying. "I know a place on the river that does an incredible—" "Mr. Holt?" Ethan's voice came from the doorway to his office. It was not loud. It never needed to be. "I believe your 11:30 is in conference room A." Derek straightened. "Right, of course. I was just getting acquainted with—" "She's unavailable." The words landed into the room with a particular kind of weight. Victoria looked up from her computer. Derek looked at Ethan. Then Derek looked back at Victoria with a smile that had become careful. "Right," he said. "Good to meet you." And he left. Victoria waited until the elevator doors had closed. "Am I?" she said. Ethan turned. "Are you what?" "Unavailable." She kept her tone professionally neutral, but the look in her eye was direct. "I wasn't aware that was part of my employment terms. You work for me. That's not ownership." He looked at her steadily. Something moved behind his eyes. Not anger, not embarrassment, but something more complicated than either. "It is now," he said quietly. He went back into his office. Victoria sat still for a moment. Her hands were flat on the desk. Her heartbeat was doing something she had not authorized it to do. She went back to work. The Hargrove Foundation Gala was one of those Chicago events that shows up on every society calendar. An October Grand Hotel ballroom, 100 tables at $10,000 each. an orchestra playing just quietly enough that you could talk over it, and half the city's wealth dressed in black tie and congratulating itself on its generosity. Victoria attended because Ethan had two board members. At this event, he needed to speak with privately, and managing those conversations required someone who could track table positions, intercept competing conversations, and ensure the timing never overlapped with the mandatory public appearances that the Hargrove family expected of major donors. She wore a deep green gown that she had selected in under 10 minutes, and that caused 3 separate conversations to stop when she walked through the door. She was not unaware of this. She was also not particularly interested in it. She was watching the drinks table. It was a habit from her previous work, not a conscious choice so much as a reflex. Watch the drinks. Watch who approaches them. Watch who lingers near someone else's glass. She spotted it within the first 40 minutes. A man she did not recognize, not staff, not a guest, stationed too casually near the right side of the bar, who reached past a server's shoulder and in one practiced motion set something small against the rim of a glass that was already poured. The movement lasted less than 2 seconds. To anyone watching normally, it read as a man reaching for a passing tray. Victoria was not watching normally. She tracked the glass. It moved down the bar. The server picked it up and began working the room. Victoria followed the path of the tray with her peripheral vision while maintaining a perfectly normal conversation with the chair of the foundation's investment committee, who was telling her about his son's new venture in renewable energy, and did not notice that she was not entirely there. The tray reached Ethan's table. She moved. By the time the server had started to set the glass down, Victoria had reached across with the smooth, unhurried movement of someone adjusting the table setting, switched her own full glass for his, and straightened up. Ethan looked at her. She met his eyes briefly. Then she looked away, smiled at something the woman to his left was saying, and stepped back to her position at the edge of the table. Later in the car, he had his car, and she had been planning to take a cab, but he opened the door for her with a look that made the cab an absurd idea. He drove in silence for several minutes. "The glass," he said finally. You swapped them." "The lighting was making me a little headachy," she said. "I wanted water." "I had water. Yours looked better." He didn't speak for a moment. Outside, the city moved past in its usual extravagant way. Lit windows, bridge lights, the distant flat gleam of the lake. "Victoria," she looked at the windshield. "You identified that from 30 feet away and reached that table in less than 8 seconds," he said. "That's not a headache." She said nothing. "What did you think was in the glass?" "Something that shouldn't have been," she said quietly. He drove. She watched the city. "How do you know about poisons?" he said. "I read," she said, widely. He had her background run by a firm he trusted implicitly. Not his internal security team, because he didn't want the paperwork trail, but an outside investigator named Harris, who had done sensitive work for him before and knew how to be thorough and quiet about it. Harris called him on a Wednesday morning. "Blackwood, talk to me." A pause that went on half a beat too long. "Victoria Hayes," Harris said. "Social security number, verified employment history, verified references, check out." "Good, except..." Another pause. "Before 3 years ago, she doesn't exist. The social is clean, but the number has the construction pattern of a relocated identity. The references are real people who confirm real conversations. But there are no photographs of her before 32, no school records. I can confirm in primary sources. No property history, no medical records, nothing that goes back before 3 years. Whoever made her history did it professionally. Not government level, but close." Ethan was quiet for a long time. Outside his windows, the lake was very still and very gray. "Is she a threat?" he said. "I don't know yet," Harris said. "She's something, I just don't know what." Ethan thanked him and hung up. He sat at his desk and thought about a woman who had arrived at his office before sunrise, who reorganized his world with quiet precision, who could spot a poisoned glass at 30 feet, and knew the IP ranges of Ukrainian proxy servers, and carried herself like a person who had learned somewhere to be ready for anything. He thought about the way she had said someone should. When he came out of his office an hour later, she was at her desk drafting correspondence. Her hair tucked back, glasses on. She only wore them sometimes, reading glasses wire-framed and small, and something about them did things to his composure that he had no intention of examining in daylight. He stopped in front of her desk. She looked up. "I'll drive you home tonight," he said. "That's not necessary. I'm responsible for my people. I'm not one of your possessions." He looked at her for a moment. He said quietly, is becoming increasingly difficult to remember. Her lips parted slightly. He went back to his office. She sat perfectly still for 3 full seconds before she trusted herself to look back at the screen. That evening, at the far end of the executive floor in the office that connected to Ethan's suite through the shared conference room, Damian Cross turned off his second monitor and reached for his phone. He had received 3 hours ago a photograph from a source he paid well and trusted completely. In the photograph, the private elevator of the building's garage level, Ethan Blackwood getting into his car, Victoria Hayes getting in beside him. Damian Cross had been Ethan's closest friend since they were 22 years old. He had been in the room when Blackwood Global was founded. He had been best man at the engagement party, the one that never became a wedding. He had stood by Ethan at the funeral of his younger brother Daniel 8 months after that. He had arranged all of it. The engagement that ended in betrayal. The leak that triggered the sabotage. The fire in Daniel's building that was ruled an accident. He had arranged it carefully over years, the way a patient man arranges the pieces of a very long plan. He needed Ethan unstable. He needed the board uncertain. He needed Blackwood Global weakened to the point where a vote of no confidence would be not just possible, but inevitable. Then Damian Cross would step in as the steady hand, the trusted friend, and take the company he had always believed should have been his. He had been so close. And then a woman named Victoria Hayes had appeared, and something in Ethan's manner had shifted in a way Damian recognized with cold precision. He was steadying, he was becoming grounded again. That was a problem. Damian looked at the photograph for a moment longer. Then he smiled. He needed to know who she really was. And when he found out, and he would find out, he would use it. His phone buzzed against the desk. He picked it up, read the message, and his smile widened, because he had just been told something very interesting indeed. Who are you really? That was the question Ethan didn't yet know how to ask. But Damian Cross was already beginning to find the answer. The announcement came on a Tuesday. Victoria was at her desk editing the language on a contract addendum. When the news alert appeared on the secondary screen, she kept running for media monitoring. She read it once, then read it again, and set down her pen very carefully. Sophia Bennett confirms engagement to Blackwood Global CEO Ethan Blackwood exclusive. The article was 4 paragraphs. There was a photograph of Sophia Bennett, impeccable in pale silk dark hair, the specific brand of beauty that came from 3 generations of money, and a very good esthetician standing outside a hotel bearing her family's name, smiling at the camera with the serene certainty of a woman who has decided something and considers the matter settled. There was no quote from Ethan. There was no photograph of Ethan. Sophia's spokesperson had provided a statement describing the engagement as a meaningful deepening of a long friendship, which was the sort of language that meant absolutely nothing and was designed to be very difficult to specifically deny. By noon, the financial news was running the story. By 2 o'clock, 3 institutional investors had called the board members they knew personally to ask whether this represented a shift in Blackwood Global's strategic direction. By 3, the stock had moved 3% on the rumor alone. Ethan came out of his office looking like a man who had spent an hour deciding between fury and calculation and had arrived at a precise combination of both. "I need you," he said. She stood. "Conference room. My office." She followed him in. He closed the door. "I have never been engaged to Sophia Bennett," he said. "I have never been in a relationship with Sophia Bennett. I have attended 4 public events with Sophia Bennett, all of them charity-related, all of them with 30 other people present. Her family's hotel group is in conversation about a joint development project. That is the entirety of our association." "I understand," Victoria said. "Damian told me this morning he'd heard she'd been making claims at a dinner last week. I dismissed it as rumor management. It wasn't." He looked at the window for a moment. "She's done it publicly now. The board is going to ask me about it directly, and any denial I give looks like either a lie or a lover's quarrel. Either way, it feeds the story." He paused. "The stock is moving." "I know." He looked at her. "There's a counter-narrative," she said carefully. "I'm listening." "If the story is that you're romantically connected to someone else, someone who is clearly not Sophia Bennett, and who is demonstrably present in your life, the engagement claim dies on its own. There's nothing to confirm and nothing to credibly deny. The story simply loses oxygen. That would require someone," he said, "who is clearly present in my life." A pause. "Yes," Victoria said. He looked at her steadily. She held his gaze. "This is a professional arrangement," she said. "Temporary, specific in scope, and I would want very clear parameters." Naturally. And if at any point it compromises my ability to do my actual work, it won't. Then I'll need you to be convincing. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. It was not quite a smile, but it was the nearest thing to one she had seen from him. That won't be the difficult part, he said. They attended 3 events in the first 2 weeks. At the first, a dinner for the Chicago Business Council, they arrived together and left together. He kept his hand at the small of her back when they walked lightly, with the specific ease of a man who has done this 100 times and is comfortable doing it again. He introduced her not as his secretary, but as Victoria, simply with a slight emphasis that left rooms to draw their own conclusions. She noticed in the way she noticed everything that he was a natural at this. He made eye contact with the right people at the right times. Smiled when smiling was required. Kept conversation at exactly the right depth for each person he spoke with. These were not the skills of a natural social creature. They were the acquired skills of an intelligent person who had learned to manage public situations the way one learns to manage anything complex through observation and practice and the careful application of attention. She wondered watching him work a room whether anyone had ever given him something back, whether anyone had ever managed a situation for him rather than one he was managing for himself, whether he had ever arrived somewhere and felt even briefly that someone else was carrying the weight of the room. She made a point of it. When a city councilman trapped him in a corner with a long and winding complaint about a zoning matter that had nothing to do with Blackwood Global, Victoria materialized at Ethan's elbow with the smooth inevitability of someone who had been watching the corner all evening. "I'm so sorry to interrupt, Mr. Blackwood. They need us at table 7. She smiled at the councilman with warm apology. "Please forgive us. He's been looking forward to this conversation all evening." They were free in under 90 seconds. "Table 7, Ethan said quietly as they crossed the room. "There is no specific requirement at table 7, she said. "There are, however, strawberry tarts and a very pleasant woman named Eleanor who breeds rescue greyhounds and will happily talk to you about it for as long as you need cover." He looked at her. He looked at her for a beat longer than the moment required. "Thank you," he said. "Eleanor's in the far corner," she said. "The greyhounds are called Mr. Bingley and Captain Von Trapp." He actually laughed. It was a short laugh, genuine and quiet. The laugh of a person who has been surprised into it by something that was funnier than they expected. Victoria looked away and composed her face and felt something warm and inadvisable settle in the center of her chest. At the second event, a luncheon at the Art Institute, he noticed she was studying a particular piece on the wall more intently than the rest. He waited until the formal part ended, then steered her back to it and asked what she was thinking. She told him, and they stood there for 20 minutes in conversation about light and composition and what made certain paintings feel inhabited. And when she looked up, there was a group of people watching them with the interested attention that people give to 2 people who have clearly forgotten the room. At the third event, a cocktail reception at a private club, Sophia Bennett was there. Victoria felt her before she saw her. That particular kind of focused social attention from across a room aimed like something sharp. Sophia worked her way across in 12 minutes. She was elegant and unhurried, and her eyes, when they landed on Victoria, had all the warmth of polished glass. "Ethan," she said, "you look tired." "I'm fine," he said. "Sophia, you know Victoria." "Your secretary," Sophia said. Her smile didn't move, but it became somehow more detailed. "His partner," Victoria said pleasantly. "He mentioned you're in the hotel industry. It must be wonderful to work in your family's business." Sophia's smile held. "He's never mentioned you," she said. "Interesting." "He's a private person," Victoria said. "It's one of the things I admire about him." She picked up 2 glasses from the tray of a passing server and handed one to Ethan, and they turned together toward a conversation with a man Ethan knew from the council, and Sophia was left precisely where she had maneuvered herself alone, having achieved nothing. In the car afterward, Ethan said, "She called you a secretary." "Yes." You corrected her." I adjusted her framing. A pause. "Thank you," he said. It was the first time he had said it. To her, possibly to anyone in recent memory. Victoria looked at the window. "You're welcome," she said. He drove her to her apartment 6 times over the following 2 weeks. On the 4th time, she didn't argue about it. On the 5th, she had coffee ready in a travel cup when he arrived in the morning because she had noticed he was stopping at a cart on the street corner, and the cart's coffee was genuinely terrible, and she found this offensive on his behalf. He found the coffee on his passenger seat and looked at it for a long moment before he started the car. "This is from Bellini's," he said. "On Huron Street. That's not on the way here." "No." "You went out of your way." "It takes 4 minutes," she said. Do you want to talk about it? He did not, but she noticed that the cup was empty before they reached the office. She made dinner for him on a Friday evening when he had a working session running late, and his usual order from the restaurant on Michigan Avenue had fallen through. She used his kitchen, the penthouse kitchen that the housekeeper cleaned twice weekly, and that had, as far as she could tell, been used perhaps 3 times in the past year. She made a simple pasta with fresh herbs from the small pots on the windowsill that someone had placed there and no one had quite killed yet. He came out of his study at 8:30 and stopped. You're cooking, he said. Pasta doesn't require much. He sat at the counter and watched her in a way she did not entirely know what to do with. Not with any kind of inappropriate intention, nothing like that. It was quieter than that and more unsettling. He watched her the way a person watches something they had almost forgotten they missed. My mother cooked on Fridays, he said. It came out unexpectedly, and she could tell by the slight pause that followed that he hadn't planned to say it. Nothing complicated, just whatever was there. What was on Saturdays? Leftovers and a very loud argument about college football. She laughed. A real laugh, not a social one. He watched her laugh. You do that, he said, once or twice an hour. Do what? Laugh. At something you're reading or thinking about, and the whole floor is different for about 5 seconds. She looked at him. He looked back at her. The pasta was ready. She served it. They ate at the kitchen counter in that particular kind of comfortable silence that is rarer than noise and more valuable, and afterwards she cleaned up and he helped without being asked, and they sat on opposite sides of the long couch in the living room with work files between them and the city glowing outside, and she looked up at some point and found that he was asleep, properly asleep. The deep, unguarded kind he clearly hadn't had in months. She sat still for a long time. She had not planned for this. The storm came at the end of October, the kind of late autumn storm that comes off Lake Michigan and means business-driving rain and sudden darkness, and a wind that rattled the penthouse windows in their frames. The power went out at 9 in the evening. Victoria had been in the kitchen. Ethan had been on the phone with the Tokyo office. In the sudden darkness, they both went still, and then the backup generator came on at half power enough for the essential systems, but not the overhead lights. He found candles. She found matches. Within 10 minutes, the long main room was lit in that soft, mutable way that changes the quality of everything. Softens edges, makes shadows warm, makes the world feel smaller and closer. She was standing at the window watching the rain sheet against the glass when she heard him cross the room. The call dropped, he said. The cell towers are probably overloaded. It'll wait until morning. She heard something different in his voice. The end-of-day quality to it, looser, more unguarded. She looked at him in the candlelight. What? She said. He looked at her for a long moment. She knew that look by now, the measuring one that was never just measurement, that always had something working underneath it. You're dangerous, he said. She raised an eyebrow. I'm standing at a window during a rainstorm. You make me forget things, he said. Important things. How it feels to be alone in a room. What I usually think about at night. A pause. I've been alone in this apartment for 3 years. I never noticed until you started being in it. She didn't speak. You make me forget, he said quietly, how lonely I am. The candles moved in some interior draft. The rain pressed its palms against the glass. The city out there muted and storm dark. She turned toward him. She was aware of how small the space between them had become without her noticing it shrink. She was aware of the warmth of candlelight and the sound of rain and the specific and very quiet danger of standing this close to a man she had promised herself to see only as a subject, a mission, a responsibility. She was aware of wanting something she could not have. She stepped back. I should check the backup systems, she said. The office server room has a water sensor. I want to make sure the alert didn't drop when the power went out. He let the moment close around her absence. Of course, he said. She went to the other room. She stood in the dark beside the window and pressed her hand against the glass. She had a mission. She had a responsibility. She had made a promise to a woman who had lost everything, who had lost a husband and a marriage, and years of her life to the actions of a man who still walked free. And Victoria had walked through that promise and into this building and this life with her eyes open. She had not expected to feel this way about the man she was trying to save. She had been gathering evidence for 6 weeks. It had required the specific quiet patience that had once been her professional specialty, working around the edges of records that were not hers to access, pulling threads from publicly available sources, cross-referencing financial flows with regulatory filings and board minutes, and the kind of secondary data that becomes significant only when you know what you're looking for. What she was looking for was Damian Cross. She had suspected him from the beginning, not from instinct alone, but from the pattern of events surrounding Daniel Blackwood's death. The fire investigator's initial report had flagged one anomaly and then somehow stopped flagging it. The insurance settlement had moved faster than it should have, and the person who stood most to gain from Daniel's removal from the company board was not Ethan, who was already the CEO, but the man who was second in line to him and had always believed he should have been first. She had a folder now with 47 pages of documented evidence. Not enough for a prosecution, not yet, but enough to establish intent, enough to know she was right. She had been in the server room on the 41st floor pulling a physical printout from the secure printer when she heard the door open. She folded the pages and turned around. Damian Cross stood in the doorway. He was 53, silver-haired, dressed in a suit that fit him perfectly. He was one of those men who had been handsome in youth and aged into a kind of commanding distinction. He looked at her with the serene, unhurried attention of a chess player who has just found the board exactly where he expected it. "So that's why you came here," he said. She said nothing. She did not move. Behind the calm of her face, she was making calculations at considerable speed. "I've known what you were for about 2 weeks," he said. "Victoria, or whatever your name actually is." He tilted his head. "The Kellerman investigation. You were the liaison analyst. You were the one who put Marcus Kellerman in federal prison." He paused. "Before that, the Harmon Group, the internal investigation that dismantled their offshore network. Also you." She kept her face still. "You're very good," he said. "I'll give you that. But you made one mistake." He stepped into the room and let the door ease shut behind him. "You let him get attached." "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do." His voice was pleasant, conversational. "Ethan believes in you. You've done something in 6 weeks that I spent 10 years making impossible. You've given him a reason to trust again." He looked at her with something close to genuine admiration. "That's impressive. And it's also going to make this considerably worse for you. Because when he finds out, and he will find out that you've been lying to him from the first day, it won't just be professional." He tilted his head. "It'll be personal. And the wounds that are personal are the ones that don't heal." She looked at him steadily. "You should have stayed away," he said. The room was very quiet. "Maybe," Victoria said. She held his gaze. "But I didn't," she said. Damian Cross was nothing if not patient. He had been patient for 10 years. He could afford to be precise. He waited until the quarterly board meeting. The room was full, all 14 board members plus Ethan, plus the 3 executives who attended as advisors. It was a standard format financial review, strategic update, forward projections. Victoria was not in the room. She was as usual at her desk outside, monitoring the feeds, managing the correspondence. She was supposed to be safe out there. She was not. Damian waited until the end of the financial review, the moment when the room was warm and familiar and slightly relaxed, and then he set a folder on the table. "Before we move to strategy," he said, in the quiet, measured tone of a man making a reluctant but necessary disclosure, "there's a matter of internal security that the board needs to be aware of." Ethan looked up from his notes. "It concerns a recent hire at the executive level," Damian continued. "Specifically, the person currently serving as executive secretary." The room was quiet. "Her name is not Victoria Hayes." He opened the folder. Documents slid forward, photographs, records. The clean, careful architecture of a man who has prepared this for weeks. "Her name is Victoria Calloway. For 11 years, she was a senior analyst and field investigator with the Federal Financial Crimes Division. She specialized in corporate infiltration, placing operatives inside target organizations under false identities to gather evidence." He looked around the room. "She resigned from the federal service 3 years ago under contested circumstances. Following her resignation, she was retained privately by an individual known to some members of this board, specifically by Laura Blackwood, the widow of our former board member Daniel Blackwood." He paused. "She was placed inside this organization by Daniel Blackwood's widow, with a constructed identity, with the explicit purpose of accessing confidential records and private communications at the executive level." The room erupted. Not loudly, these were not loud people, but the kind of controlled professional eruption that is measured in the speed of chairs being straightened and the sharpness of people leaning forward and the specific quality of 14 people turning to look at the man at the head of the table. Ethan was not moving. He sat very still. Victoria, outside the glass wall of the conference room, looked up from her desk at the sound of the shift in the room's energy. Through the glass across the length of the room, she saw Ethan's face. She had studied his face for 2 months. She knew it the way cartographers know terrain, every line of it, every mode. She knew his professional face and his tired face, and the face he made when something surprised him, and the face he made when he was working through a complex calculation. She had never seen this face before. This was the face of a man being hurt. The glass door opened. Marcus Webb, head of legal, was standing in the frame. "Victoria," he said carefully, "Mr. Blackwood has asked to see you." They cleared the room. It was just the two of them, him at the head of the long table, her standing at the other end, and the glass windows with the city behind him, and everything that had accumulated between them over 8 weeks in the air of the room, like something physical. "Was any of it real?" he said. His voice was very controlled, more controlled than she had ever heard it. The restraint of it was more frightening than anger would have been. "Yes," she said. "Don't." The word came out flat and immediate. "Don't tell me yes, Victoria, or whoever you are. Don't do that." "My name is Victoria," she said. "That much is real. Your name is the only thing that's real." He stood. She had never seen him stand like that. Not the commanding, assured stance of a CEO in his own building, but something rawer. A man on his feet because sitting still was no longer possible. "Your resume is fabricated. Your employment history is fabricated. Your reference letters came from people who were paid to make them credible. You walked into this building as a lie. I walked into this building to protect you." "No." He turned to the window. His shoulders were very tight. "Don't clean it up." "I'm not cleaning it up," she said. Her voice was steadier than she had any right to expect it to be given what was happening in her chest. "The sabotage 10 years ago, the leak that exposed the Meridian acquisition, the fire that killed Daniel, that wasn't the woman you were engaged to. That was someone inside this building, someone who is still inside this building." He didn't move. "Laura Blackwood found evidence 3 years ago," Victoria said. "Not enough to go to the authorities with, they'd already closed the case. But enough to know that someone very close to you had arranged for Daniel's death and blamed it on a woman who had nothing to do with it." She saw his hands, very still against the glass. "She came to me because I had experience with this kind of operation, because I knew how to get close enough to find what she couldn't find from the outside." She took one step forward, just one. "I took this job because I knew you were in danger, not past danger, present danger." He wasn't finished. Ethan turned. He said. She met his eyes. He stared at her for a long moment. "Get out," he said. She had expected it. She had known from the moment Damien stood up in that boardroom that this was the version of the day she was going to get. She had prepared for it in the abstract, the way you prepare for weather. You can predict but cannot stop. She had not prepared for how it actually felt. "I trusted you," he said. It came out differently than the previous sentences, quieter, without the control. The way something breaks when you've been holding it together very carefully for a long time. "I know," she said. "I let you—" He stopped. He turned back to the window. "I let you in." "I know." She picked up her bag from the chair. "I left something in my desk drawer, an envelope. You don't have to open it now, but when you're ready." She walked to the door. "I was trying to save you. I know that doesn't fix what I did." She left. The elevator was empty. She kept her spine very straight going down through the dark building, and she did not let herself feel anything until she was outside in the cold November air beside Lake Michigan, and the wind was coming off the water, and she stood there for a moment with her eyes closed and breathed. Then she walked. He fired her officially on Thursday. The paperwork was processed through HR. It was professional, it was clean, it was correct. He did not sleep on Thursday night. He had not slept on Tuesday night or Wednesday night. He was running on the same machinery he had survived on for 3 years before she appeared. The machinery of a man who has decided that rest is a luxury and has arranged his life accordingly. He was very familiar with it. He had thought he had adjusted to it. What he had not adjusted to, what he had apparently forgotten how to do, was the version of it that existed after. The specific silence of the office at 6 in the morning when nobody was there ahead of him. The absence of coffee from Bellini's on Huron Street. The schedule that was correct and functional and managed by the interim assistant from the staffing agency and contained nothing, not a single note, not a single flagged anomaly that he had not specifically requested. She had been in his life for 8 weeks. He could not explain even to himself how something could feel so absent after only 8 weeks. He worked. He held meetings. He managed the media response to the board situation with the cold efficiency that was his particular gift. He gave Damien no indication of suspicion, which required a degree of performance that he would not have believed himself capable of a year ago. Damien had come by his office on the Friday after the board meeting and expressed what he called deep regret about the situation with Victoria. He was very good. His expression was composed into a specific configuration of reluctant duty, the face of a man who has done something painful because it was right. He had been wearing that face for 20 years, Ethan realized now, and he had believed it for 20 years, and the understanding of that fact was its own particular kind of sorrow. She put you at risk, Damien said. You understand that. Whatever she felt for you, and I think she may have felt something real which makes it worse. The fundamental fact is that she came here to take advantage of your trust. Ethan looked at him. Of course, he said. He had learned long ago in the years after Daniel and the restructuring of himself into someone who could function without the things he'd lost. That the face you show the world and the face you show yourself are two entirely separate tools, and keeping them separate is not dishonesty, but survival. He showed Damien a grieved but resolved face. Inside, he was reading every conversation of the last 8 weeks differently. He was thinking about the glass at the Hargrove Gala. He was thinking about the cybersecurity incident and the IP range she had named without hesitation. He was thinking about the documents she had reorganized in a way that now he looked back had separated 3 files that seemed incidental. From the main body of the archive had gently and visibly moved them to a position where he was more likely to notice them. Had they been planted there? Or had she been arranging for him to find them on his own, in his own time, so that the discovery would feel like his own? He was thinking about a woman who had arrived before anyone else, who had quietly solved every crisis before it became visible, who had in 11 different ways over 8 weeks been standing between him and something he couldn't see. He was thinking about what it meant that someone had arranged all of that with patience and skill and at considerable personal cost. He did not open the envelope. He did not open it on Thursday. He did not open it on Friday. He put it in the center drawer of his desk and looked at it sometimes and told himself he wasn't ready. On Sunday morning, 3 days after she had left, he sat down at his desk with a cup of coffee he had made himself in the kitchen because the espresso machine needed recalibration and he hadn't asked anyone to fix it, and he opened the drawer. He picked up the envelope. He sat with it in his hands for a while. Then he opened it. Inside was a thumb drive and a single page of handwritten notes. The notes were in her handwriting, the same precise, confident handwriting he had seen for 8 weeks in the margins of his schedule, in the annotations of his documents, in the small notes she left beside things she wanted him to notice. The page said, "The fire investigator's original report filed November 14th, 10 years ago. Flagged for anomalous accelerant patterns, consistent with deliberate origin. Filed. Then amended 3 days later. The amendment removed the flag. The investigator was paid a consulting fee by a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands 11 days after the amendment. The shell company has 4 beneficial owners. 3 are anonymous. The 4th was registered in error with a real name attached. That name is on the drive. Along with 3 years of financial transfers between this company and a secondary holding entity incorporated in Delaware. That holding entity has 1 director. You know his name. There's also a folder of communications emails printed to PDF between the holding entity's director and a woman named Carla Fontaine, who was employed at the time as a data specialist at Blackwood Global and who left the company 8 months before Daniel died. These communications established that someone paid Carla Fontaine to provide the Meridian acquisition details. Not your fiancée, Carla Fontaine, who was paid through this entity. Your fiancée didn't betray you. Someone used her access credentials without her knowledge. I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough to tell you this directly. I should have found another way. Take care of yourself. Sleep sometimes. V. He read it twice. Then he plugged in the drive. He was still at his desk at 4 in the morning going through the documents when he called Marcus Webb. I'm sorry about the hour, he said. It's fine, Marcus said immediately in the tone of a man who has never once resented a call from his employer at 4 a.m. What do you need? I need you to look at something, Ethan said, and then I need you to tell me who we call. He pulled up the first document and began to explain. He drove to her apartment on Monday evening. He had her address from the HR file. He sat outside for a few minutes. The building was modest, a 6-story red brick in Wicker Park, the kind of neighborhood where people are between one version of their life and the next. He had not called ahead. He went up. He knocked. Nothing. He knocked again. The neighbor across the hall opened her door and looked at him with the specific suspicion of a person who has watched too many true crime documentaries. She moved, the neighbor said. Last Thursday, couple of boxes, a cab. He stood in the empty hallway. Did she say where she was going? The neighbor looked at him for a moment. Boston, she said. She mentioned family. He took the elevator down. He sat in the car for a long time. Outside, Chicago's November evening was doing what it always did. Moving quickly toward dark, the wind finding every gap, the lake somewhere invisible and present. He started the car. He had work to do first. But after that, he was going to Boston. The federal case moved faster than anyone expected. This was partly because Victoria had done her work extremely well. 47 pages of documented evidence supported by a thumb drive of digital records supported by the financial trail that she had followed through 3 offshore entities and back to a single name. But it was also because Ethan Blackwood, when he decided to act on something, brought the full machinery of his intelligence and his resources to bear on it with a completeness that very few people in the world can manage. He contacted 2 people at once. Marcus Webb, who knew every corporate attorney in the state of Illinois and had 3 on the phone within the hour, and a contact at the FBI's white-collar crime division, whom Ethan knew from a previous regulatory matter, and who, when he heard the shape of the case being outlined, said, "Send me everything. Tonight." The FBI already had a partial file on the Blackwood sabotage from 10 years ago. It had never been formally closed, only deprioritized, which meant the evidence that Victoria had gathered didn't need to start from zero. It needed to complete a picture that was already partially drawn. It took 11 days. Damian Cross was arrested on a Wednesday morning in the lobby of Blackwood Global as he was arriving for work. The agents had timed it deliberately, not to humiliate him, but because a public arrest in the lobby of the company he had spent 10 years trying to take was the kind of institutional clarity that the board and the investors and the employees needed to see. It needed to be unambiguous. It was. He was walked out in handcuffs past the security desk, past the reception area, past the 24 employees who happened to be in the lobby at that hour. He kept his face very controlled, but Ethan, watching from the mezzanine level, saw the precise moment when Damian understood that it was over. He had looked up. It must have been involuntary, some remnant of 20 years of professional alignment toward the place where Ethan usually stood. Ethan looked back at him steadily. Then he turned away. Sophia Bennett was named 3 days later in the federal complaint as an accessory not to the original sabotage, which had occurred before her involvement, but to the more recent manipulation of Blackwood Global's stock through the false engagement announcement which Damian had orchestrated with her cooperation, and which constituted a form of securities fraud. Her family's legal team was very good. She would not go to prison, but her involvement would become public, and the Sophia Bennett who had stood in a hotel lobby proclaiming her engagement was about to spend considerable time in rooms where lawyers explained the consequences of helping dangerous men with their plans. Ethan issued a formal statement about Daniel. It was 3 paragraphs. It did not perform grief. It stated facts acknowledged the wrong that had been done and announced that the Blackwood Foundation would fund a scholarship in Daniel's name at the university he had attended. 3 paragraphs. He wrote them himself at his desk at 1 in the morning, and when he was done, he sat for a long time with his hands flat on the desk and let himself feel what he had been not feeling for a decade. He allowed himself 30 minutes. Then he booked a flight to Boston. Boston in December is a particular kind of beautiful cold and certain. The harbor lit in steel and silver. The old buildings wearing their age with a dignity that Chicago's skyline doesn't quite achieve. He had been to Boston 100 times for business. He had never been here feeling the way he felt now, which was more nervous than he had been in any boardroom in his career. He had an address from Laura Blackwood, who had been the one finally to tell him everything. He should have been told earlier, sitting in a coffee shop in Lincoln Park, her hands wrapped around a mug, her eyes careful and sad. She had explained how she had found Victoria, what she had asked of her, what Victoria had agreed to, and what she had put aside of her own life to do it. "She cared about you," Laura had said. "I want you to know that wasn't part of the assignment. There was no assignment for that part." The building in Boston was a narrow brownstone on a quiet street in the South End, well-maintained, small window boxes that were bare for winter, a black door. He knocked. He heard movement inside the specific sound of someone who is not hurrying but is wondering who it is. Then the sound of the lock. The door opened. She was in a gray sweater and dark trousers, her hair loose, and for 1/2 second she looked at him the way you look at something you have been trying not to think about and have found suddenly in front of you. "Why are you here?" she said. He looked at her. "Because I was an idiot," he said. Something crossed her face. It was complicated surprise and something that might have been relief and the specific guarded quality of a person who has been hurt and is deciding whether it's safe to stop guarding. She laughed. It came out slightly broken at the edges with the sound of someone who had not expected to laugh today. "That's your opening," she said. "I had several rehearsed," he said. They all sounded like corporate communications. She looked at him in the doorway, her hand on the frame, the warm light of the apartment behind her, the cold December air between them. "Damien's been arrested," she said. "Yes, I know, I saw the news." She paused. The federal complaint included the evidence from the drive. "All of it," he said. "You built an airtight case." "It wasn't airtight. The attorneys cleaned it up." "Victoria." He stopped her. "It was excellent. Everything you did was excellent. And I know it cost you something being in that building doing what you did. I know it wasn't simple." She looked away for a moment. Down the street at nothing particular. At the bare winter lindens and the street lights coming on in the early dark. "It cost me more than I planned for," she said quietly. "I planned very carefully. I had a very detailed internal accounting of what the job would and wouldn't require of me." She paused. "I was wrong about the wouldn't column." "In what way?" he said. She looked back at him. "In the way," she said, "where I stood in your kitchen one Friday evening making pasta and told myself I was still doing a job, and I knew I was lying to myself, and I kept cooking anyway." He was very still. "In the way," she said, "where you fell asleep on the couch in the middle of a working session, and I sat there for 40 minutes, reading the same page because I didn't want to leave." A pause. "In the way where I swapped the glass at the Hargrove Gala, and my hands were completely steady, because my hands are always steady, but when I looked up and you were looking at me, something else wasn't." The street was very quiet. "I'm not telling you this," she said, "to make it easier for me. I'm telling you because I think you deserve to know that all of it was true, even the parts that complicated everything, especially those." He looked at her for a long moment. "You should have told me," he said. "Yes, I would have thrown you out." "Yes. And Daniel would still be—" "Yes." She met his eyes. "I know. There was no version of this that was clean. I made choices that hurt you, and they also happened to be the choices that gave the case enough time to become real. I would not choose differently if I had to do it again." She paused. "But I would hate it the same amount." He looked at her. "Also," she said slightly quieter, "I would have found a way to tell you the truth sooner, if I'd been braver, or smarter about timing. You," he said, "are the bravest person I have encountered in my professional life. Courage is not what was missing." She blinked. "Oh," she said. "Timing," he said, "is a different problem." "Yes," she said. "Timing," he said, "can sometimes be fixed." She looked at him in the doorway. "It's December," she said. "I know." "In Boston. I took a coat." She pressed her lips together, fighting the expression on her face. "I also know," he said, "that I had something I wanted to say to you, something that's not corporate communications." She waited. "You walked into my life pretending to be my secretary," he said. "You became the first person in 3 years who made me feel like the world had something in it worth staying awake for. You broke walls I had spent a decade building. You saved me not just from Damien, not just from the company falling apart, but from the version of myself that had decided that being alone was just a permanent condition." He paused. "And I was stupid enough to send you away." She pressed her lips together. She said to no one in particular. He took one step forward. "I spent 8 years after Daniel," he said, "running from the idea that I could be wrong about a person. I turned everything I had, every skill, every resource, every waking hour toward making Blackwood Global something that couldn't be touched. Because if the company was impenetrable, then nothing like that could happen again. And because if I was working, I didn't have to think about the fact that I had let someone get close to me and it had cost me my brother." He stopped. "And then you arrived." She looked up at him. "And I watched you solve problems at 6 in the morning, and I thought, this is dangerous. And I watched you swap a glass at a gala, and I thought, who is this woman? And I watched you make pasta in my kitchen on a Friday night, and I thought—" He paused. I thought this is what I forgot. This specific thing, that another person can be in a room with you and it can just feel like something. She was very still. I also thought, he said with the specific, dry precision of a man who cannot be entirely serious, even when he is being very serious, that I was going to be in considerable trouble. She laughed. Broken-edged, warm, genuine. You were, she said. I know. He looked at her. Victoria, I don't need a secretary anymore. Her eyes were bright. What do you need? She said. He looked at her. My wife, he said. She did not say yes immediately. She said, that's a significant thing to say on a doorstep in December. He said, I'm aware. She said, I haven't had dinner. He said, neither have I. She said, there's a place 2 streets over. He said, lead the way. They went to dinner. They talked for 3 hours. She told him things she hadn't been able to tell him before about the federal service, about the investigation, about the years she had spent working in the spaces between what was provable and what was true. He told her things he hadn't told anyone in a long time about Daniel, about the years after, about what it was like to run a company, while also quietly carrying the weight of a grief you can't explain because you can't admit you've been wrong about who caused it. At the end of the dinner, walking back along the quiet street, she put her hand in the crook of his arm. Not dramatically, just because it was cold and he was there and it felt finally like the right place for her hand to be. Chicago, he said. Eventually, she said. There's a position open, he said. Chief Strategy Officer. The previous holder left under complicated circumstances. I don't have a business degree, she said. You have 11 years of federal investigative experience, fluency in 4 languages, a demonstrated ability to identify threats before they materialize, and you reorganized an entire executive floor in 27 minutes on your first day. 23, she said. I know. He paused. I timed it. She looked up at him. You timed it, she said. First morning. I saw what you'd done when I walked in. I looked at the timestamp on the schedule file. He met her eyes in the winter dark. 23 minutes. And I thought this woman is going to be a problem. And I was right, he said. She laughed. He kissed her. Right there on the South End street in December with the cold air and the distant harbor and the quiet brownstones watching them with their blank winter windows. He kissed her the way a man kisses someone when he has been thinking about it for a long time and has decided to stop not doing it, and she kissed him back the way a woman kisses someone when she is finally allowing herself to want the thing she has been refusing to want. When they pulled apart, her cheeks were cold and her eyes were warm. Chief Strategy Officer, she said. Yes. What does that actually entail? Solving problems before they become disasters, he said. You told me once that's what you do. She looked at him. That's what I do, she said. Bah. Epilogue. 6 months later. The office was exactly as she had organized it on her first morning, precise, functional, every system running at the efficiency of a machine that has been calibrated by someone who understood what it was actually for. Victoria came in at 6. She was always in at 6. Some things did not change. She reviewed the schedule, flagged a conflict in the afternoon, a board subcommittee meeting that had been accidentally layered over a call with Sol, corrected it, and set the revised version on Ethan's desk. Then she went to her own office, which was around the corner from his, now with a glass wall and a view of the lake, and her name on the door in brushed steel letters that still 6 months on gave her a small and genuine pleasure every time she saw them. Victoria Blackwood, Chief Strategy Officer. She was on her second coffee and her third document when his voice came through the open connecting door. You moved the Sol call. There was a conflict. I resolved it. I didn't ask you to. You were going to notice in about 4 minutes and be annoyed about it. I saved us both the time. A pause. That's not your job anymore, he said. You're not my secretary. No, she said. I'm your Chief Strategy Officer. Strategy includes not letting you walk into a double booking at 3:50. Another pause. Fair, he said. She heard him stand across the room and lean in the connecting doorway. She did not look up from her document. You're doing it again, he said. What? Solving things that haven't become problems yet. Force of habit. You've been doing it since day one. She felt him cross the room. She felt the warmth of him standing beside her desk. This, too, had not changed that specific sense of presence that preceded him into rooms. He picked up her coffee mug, took a sip, and set it back down. That's mine, she said, finally looking up. You weren't using it. She looked at him. He looked back at her. He had slept last night, genuinely slept the deep sleep of a man whose life had rearranged itself around something sustainable, and it showed in his face. Not softness, exactly. Just the difference between a man who is running on survival and a man who is running on something better. His wedding ring caught the morning light. Hers did too. You're becoming clingy, she said. He reached down and straightened the corner of the document she was reading. It didn't need straightening. No, he said. Which I saw. He kissed her forehead. She felt him smile against her hair. I'm becoming yours, he said. Outside the 42nd floor windows, Chicago was doing what Chicago does in May. Golden and enormous. The lake turned improbable shades of blue. The skyline standing against the late morning in its particular confident way, all glass and stone, and the accumulated ambition of a city that has always believed in its own future. Somewhere in the building below them, a company was running. Problems were being anticipated before they happened. Meetings were unfolding on schedules that had been curated with care. Contracts were being vetted. Communications were being managed. Crises were being intercepted before they became visible to the people they might have harmed. On the 42nd floor, a woman with a legal pad and a wedding ring and the efficient particular attention of someone who has always seen things before other people see them sat at her desk and looked out at the lake for just a moment. Then she went back to work. Neither of them was hiding anymore.